Thank you, Chair, and to welcome the witnesses here today. And I would like to begin very clearly by acknowledging, and you have referenced it, Mr McKeown, the put-through really of 1.2 million claims from 730,000 people over a very short time frame. That was a phenomenal put-through, and I want to acknowledge the outstanding work really of those in social protection nationally, but most especially in the local offices. I'm very, very conscious of that myself. Many of the staff coming in at 6 o'clock in the morning to deal with ever-changing, demands and changes in payments and everything else, and making themselves accessible and basically very much being on the front line. And I don't know that they're always recognised as being on the front line, but very much so I would recognise them as being on the front line, and I would like to acknowledge that sterling service at the very outset. I'd like to ask a very specific question also to Mr McKeown in relation to the pandemic unemployment payment and the arrears in relation to that. And there are a number of cases, quite a lot of cases, where there would be arrears. And I just want to know what accommodation for payment is being made going forward to ensure that that payment is being made.
Yeah, thank you, Deputy. The issue of arrears, the Department will pay back any arrears that is due to be paid. We hope to do so as quickly as possible. What I would say is the issue of arrears may not be as large as people think. So to give you a practical example, somebody, and most people would have been laid off on a Monday, they didn't receive a payment that week, but they received a payment the following week, and as a consequence believe they've missed a week. In practice, we paid the payment 1 week in arrears, and what's happening now is people go back to work as they're finding they're receiving a payment in the first week they're back in work. So the issue of arrears is probably just a little bit, I don't want to over make this point, just a little bit exaggerated. The processing of arrears will happen over the next number of months. We do have to review all 730,000 people who applied, the 688,000 people who actually received the payment. We have to review all those claims on an individual basis. We're in the process of writing an IT script, an IT program to try and help automate that as quickly as we can. At this point, given the work that we still have a huge volume of work in processing the nearly 500,000 payments that we're making every week, in managing moves from the pandemic payment onto the wage subsidy scheme and back on and so on. It will be some time. We have to prioritise getting the payments that are in place out and make sure that happens. It will take some time, but we anticipate that we'll start making payments of arrears in Q3.
Thank you. I appreciate that. Chair, I just realised I actually have 6 minutes. A very specific question, and one that I have raised at every session here today particularly. It's a sector of workers that I feel that have been lost in this whole pandemic, and that's seasonal workers. And I have to raise the case of seasonal workers. I'm from a tourism county in Kerry, and we have a huge, huge number of seasonal workers who have lost out when it comes to the pandemic unemployment payment. They are in an industry that really we have little knowledge at this stage as to how much it's going to improve over the next number of months. Their stamps are running out. They traditionally would have worked as seasonal workers, so to have their stamps for winter time or whatever. So I just want to know what measures can be taken to support seasonal workers, and what's in the frame, either from Mr Watt or from Mr McKeown.
Thank you, Deputy. The issue of seasonal workers has been raised with us a bit. As you know, the conditions or the eligibility conditions for the pandemic payment, like normal job seeker payment, is that a person was unemployed immediately, was in employment immediately prior to claiming the payment. It's very difficult, and while I appreciate the issue, I think you'll also understand the difficulty we would face in trying to distinguish or identify potential but unrealised employment and separating out genuine cases of that from other cases that might not be possible or might not have happened. And
sorry to interrupt you, could I just say on that point, seasonal workers who would be in a position to prove that they have a history of seasonal work, they would be able to prove it from previous years. Would that not be acceptable?
Well, again, Deputy, there would be people who work seasonally 1 year, not the following year, and so on. The other issue, I think, which is germane to this actually, is we had full employment before we came into this. People who were claiming job seekers payments in January, February and early March of this year continue to have access to those payments. They claimed those payments on the basis that they couldn't get employment in January, February and March. Yet we know the economy was at full employment and we had thousands of vacancies. it does create a bit of a difficulty if those people now say, well, actually, I couldn't get a job back then, when we know actually there was quite a lot of employment around. We have to be careful. It is obviously something that would be possible to change, but that would, I think, require a change in the law as well, and a change in how we operate our job seeker payments.
Thank you. I'm sorry, I'm conscious of just of a minute. I think perhaps maybe something that could be looked at the Tourism Task Force as well. I do feel they're a forgotten sector, and I just want to raise two others. One would be the over 66s, and the other are students who would traditionally have worked over the summer to help themselves through college. They're not in a position to do that now because the jobs aren't there, and they're not eligible for any payments as they're students.
Some additional time from...
I'm taking 6 minutes.
Okay. Okay.
Yeah, and I'm just wondering, is there scope to do something specifically for students and the over 66s, either of you? And I'm conscious I've only 53 seconds left.
Okay, well, maybe definitely I'll take the issue of students first. Generally, students in any year don't qualify for job seeker payment in the summer period between school years or between college years. The pandemic unemployment payment is effectively the job seeker payment, and the same conditions apply, so therefore they're not eligible for it. What I would say is that if there are real issues for students, I'm not too sure that the pandemic unemployment payment is the mechanism through which those issues would be addressed. I do acknowledge that people that might have had an anticipation of employment and then saving up during that period may not now get access to that employment, and that may be a difficulty for them. But I'm not too sure that making an unemployment payment is the best method in which to address that particular issue. I'd also point out that we are still struggling in some cases to fill jobs. We're still struggling to fill jobs in the horticulture sector, we're still struggling to fill jobs in the care sector, we're still struggling to fill jobs in some retail areas. So I think there is work there as well. I don't want to overstate that, but I think that is something that should be borne in mind. I think the other issue, of course, is that many students have been in receipt of the pandemic unemployment payment for some time over the past number of months. So they're just issues that need to go into the mix in considering these, that government has to take account of in considering these issues. With regard to pensioners, the pandemic unemployment payment, as I said out in my opening statement, was a quick, rapid-fire way of getting a job seeker payment into place. The standard rules of job seeker payments as they apply to people between the ages of 18 and 66. The state income support that's paid for people aged over 66 is the state pension. That is still available. It's available to those people, and that is the rules of the game, so to speak. Again, a change to that would be a fairly fundamental change in how the social welfare system is constructed, and would, I believe, require legislation.
Okay. Thank you, Mr. McKeown, and thank you, Deputy Foley.